particular pandemic in the past?
Well, the 1919 flu, pretty much everything went back to normal, and people quite quickly forgot about it afterwards. But they'd been through a hell of a trauma. They'd had the First World War as well as the revolutionary period here in Ireland, so they were probably really longing, for a bit of partying and getting out, and everything went back to normal really quickly.
But is there a peculiar thing about human psychology that when there's been a major illness like that, people actually want to forget about it, almost or pretend that it didn't happen?
Yeah, it seems to very much have been the case, because it literally was forgotten, not just in Irish history, but also globally. And it was only when Alfred Crosby, the great American environmental historian, in the 1970s, started to talk about this huge silent trauma that had never been spoken about, and yet had infected the war, maybe even influenced the outcome of the First World War, and had, felled people like Woodrow Wilson in the middle of the Paris Peace Conference.
Does history also show cycles that we get pandemics, that there were many people who were warning us for years that something like this actually was bound to happen? They may have said it would be sort of a flu outbreak. It happened to be something different.
Yeah, I think that there are stages when medicine gets quite cocky, and in a way nature shows them what's what then. And that certainly happened in 1918, 1919, that they thought that they had infectious disease under control with bacteriology. And but that since, I think about the 1500s, it's been possible to identify, I think, 14 different influenza pandemics. And they came about every 30 years. So we had the 1890s Russian flu. Very quickly after that, we had the 1918, 1920 in some parts of the world, Spanish flu. Then we had in 1957 the Asian flu, in 1968 the Hong Kong flu. And then there was a long wait. And I think it's fair to say science and medicine got nervous, or else also thought, oh, look, we have it all under control now. One or the other, two conflicting views there. And then it was 2009 before we had an officially declared pandemic, with the Mexican influenza A pandemic then.
Do economies tend to bounce back? Because we had Danny McCoy of IBEC with us last week, very confident that once the vaccine is distributed, people have it, that there will be a very sharp rebound in the economy. Does that necessarily happen?
Well, with the 2009 pandemic, obviously it really flattened Mexico's tourism industry in the short term. I think it was about 20 billion quid's worth of damage it did to it, but it did bounce back fairly quickly. In 1918, 1919, again, it's very hard to pull away the war statistics from what happened, but certainly the 20s were the roaring 20s. People were spending.
And then followed by the Great Depression.
Followed by the Great Depression. Yeah.
Luke, what do you make of this? I mean, do you think will the vaccine be the end game for the coronavirus pandemic, that we will in a year's time be wondering what the hell was all that about?
We won't forget it, Matt. That's for definite, by the way. It'll be like 1980. I'm sure I would agree. It's been a massive effect on the world's population. So we're not going to forget in a hurry. We may be more cautious, hopefully, once we get out of it. But things will begin to go back to normal, remember. Now, we may still have a bit of distancing and occasional mask wearing here and there, but life will return to normal, and the vaccine will be the big way to do this, I guess.
Why? If we have an effective vaccine, why would we need to continue with social distancing and wearing masks?
It's nervousness. You see, the SARS pandemic, or the SARS outbreak, I guess you'd call it, and the MERS, that wasn't massive. Only 10,000 people died, but that gave rise to mass mask wearing in Asia more and more, so people remembered, even though it was small scale, I guess. We don't want this to happen again, do we? Let's face it. And that memory will persist for a while, is the prediction, I guess.
Okay, tell me a little bit more about this vaccine, though, because we touched on this a little bit earlier, but could there be potential side effects that are not known about as yet, which would give us cause for concern?
There's always unknowns with vaccines. The first was how efficacious is it. I mean, they've ticked that box now with 4 of them, 90% around, say. The second one then is, will there be any problems? Now, normally you see side effects in a month of giving the vaccine, right? In history, you see the side effects emerge within a month. We're less worried about long-term effects. That'll be watched closely, though. Once the vaccine's rolled out, you vaccinate millions, they'll watch very closely to see if anything is going wrong. But we're optimistic that once we've gone through this first safety hurdle, it should be fine. Now remember, there are adverse events. They're very rare. You got to be honest with people. Vaccines occasionally have harmed people, but it's a minority, tiny numbers, and the risk of that is so small that you justify the use of the vaccine.
And what good have they done? What illnesses have been eradicated that would have potentially taken tens, hundreds of millions of lives.
Well, the consensus view is that the top 5 medical advances, vaccines is number 1. It saved millions and millions and millions of lives through history. Smallpox was a scourge. Hundreds of millions of people died of smallpox. The vaccine got rid of smallpox entirely. Polio is the big one that people all might remember. In the 1950s, there were 20,000 children a year being paralysed by polio in America. The vaccine came out. Within 4 years, it was less than 10 people. And that was the vaccine protected all those children. And there's countless examples now of vaccines having a hugely beneficial effect.
But isn't there also historically out an awful lot of examples of people fighting against vaccines and saying, be it on religious grounds or health grounds, actually trying to say, don't take them, these are dangerous to you?
Yeah, there's a long history of that right through with smallpox, and we had smallpox protesters here in Ireland in the Republican movement in the 1910s. But right around the world, we have had real issues with that people think that the vaccines, indeed in 1918, they thought that the typhus vaccine that was given to the American troops was what was actually spreading the flu disease, and that it was a reaction.
Of course, that happened at a time when we didn't have the internet as we have now. Would there be concerns, or perhaps this time around, that the availability of the internet to push out conspiracy theories could make it more difficult to actually get people to accept a vaccine?
It's not only pushing out conspiracy theories about today's vaccines, but also about what happened in the past. So you see the proliferation of vaccine conspiracy or vaccine theories about, the 5G masks and all those kind of things are really escalating massively on the internet. And what do you do about it? It's really hard.
Do you do, Luke?
You got to be aware of it, first of all, and counter it as best you can. It's tough, though. It will be there. It's almost impossible to stop that kind of thing. Again, you appeal to reasonable people and say, look, here's the data, here's the safety data, here's the evidence we have, here's the history of vaccines, here's what every healthcare agency in the world, if the FDA approved these vaccines, will say, use this vaccine. And then hopefully people go, right, I'll go in with that.
But what about then everyone being able to get the vaccine and been distributed fairly? Because I think if you go back to the 1950s and the polio vaccine, Dr. Jonas Salk, the Americans made sure that everybody got it globally. I mean, how concerned would you be that history doesn't always work out like that that some countries might keep vaccine for themselves and not distribute it in other parts of the world to poorer countries?
Absolutely. That's always a concern. I suppose the traditional focus would have been on Africa, but Africa is actually doing quite well, isn't it, Luke, with COVID-19. So that is an issue. It would be lovely to see a mass global plan, and I think we have some moves in that, haven't we?
AstraZeneca said they're going to give 2 billion doses away to poorer countries, for instance. They're on record as saying that. An organisation called COVAX is a fantastic... That's 90 governments are putting money into a pot to provide vaccines for low-income and middle-income countries. So the point is not that it's self-interest. If the virus is got rid of in Europe and it's burning away somewhere else, that's not good, because it come back in again. So there's 2 reasons to do it. One is to help these poorer countries, but secondly, to stop it coming back. So there's incentives.
Some of these pharmaceutical companies taking different models in their approach to the vaccine, and that some are doing it for profit and others are doing it because they feel it's the right thing to do.
I think in the first instance it'll be free. All the companies will probably give this away for free. Certainly AstraZeneca will. Pfizer on record is saying they'll try to make this free. And our governments have paid already up front for many of these things, you see. So all those companies were invested in by the EU, invested in some of these companies, you see. So we've paid already for the vaccine in a sense. So it should be free. And then maybe in year 2 or 3 they may recoup some of their investment. I guess that might happen next. But certainly in the first instance, the hope is these vaccines are free to everybody in the world.
If they weren't to be free, how much would they cost people?
Well, the AstraZeneca one's much cheaper. That's $5 a shot, they're saying at the moment. The Pfizer one is $20 a shot, and Moderna is $23 a shot. So we know AstraZeneca is...
Is that the cost price? Because you know the way other costs get added on for the administration, distribution, warehousing, the rest of it.
That's the basic cost of the vaccine. Now, what can happen is they charge you for vaccinating you. That's the other worry we would have. In other words, the vaccine is free, but it's going to be €10 to be given. That won't happen, by the way, we hope. But you wouldn't believe, Matt, that the attention on this is massive. This is a chance for the world to unite, remember. And in fact, Biden himself, did you hear him? He said this is a world problem. It will take a world sort of together to fight this. And it's a tremendous, let's hope it's true, I suppose. Let's hope people join forces in this way.
It's also a big chance for public health and vaccination to show its worth and to get really good quality information across to the public, and things like using incorporating stories from people who are damaged by these diseases and obviously COVID-19, long COVID-19, people to talk about it and to explain just exactly what happens.
To finish with you, Ed, I believe you think we're in what you call a fizzle stage at present. What does that mean?
Yeah, the Harvard professor of the history of medicine, Charles Rosenberg, argues that every major epidemic of disease goes through kind of 4 acts like a play, and it begins with the fear and the unknown disease, and then gradually the disease gets manageable, and then science gets to grip with it. But the final stage is when it disappears off the news and it's fizzled out, and that's the stage we're really longing for.
Aren't we just? Thank you very much for